At 19, Clara had never imagined her life would narrow into a single suffocating moment standing at the altar of a small-town church with trembling hands and a heart pounding not with love, but with fear, confusion, and helpless resignation. Her white dress felt heavier than armor. Her breath felt borrowed, and every smile she forced felt like a lie told too loudly to ignore, because this was not a wedding born of romance or choice, but of obligation and quiet pressure, whispered through her family for months, until her resistance was worn thin, until she stopped fighting because she no longer had the strength to fight at all. And the man standing beside her, Elias, was a stranger she barely knew. Tall, silent, distant, with eyes that seemed permanently shadowed by something unreadable, something that made her chest tighten whenever she met his gaze. Not because he was cruel or loud or harsh, but because he was too quiet, too controlled, too composed in a way that made her feel small and uncertain about what kind of life awaited her beyond this moment. The town watched with polite smiles and curious eyes, whispering behind gloved hands about how lucky she was, how stable her future would be, how good of a provider Elias was rumored to be. But none of them saw the way her fingers shook as she accepted his ring. None of them heard the silent plea in her heart begging for time, for choice, for freedom, and none of them noticed how her mother squeezed her arm a little too tightly as if to remind her that this was necessary. This was right. This was what she had to do, even if every part of her soul whispered that she was walking into a life she did not understand and had not chosen. Elias barely spoke during the ceremony, his voice low and steady when required, his expression calm but distant, and when he looked at her there was no tenderness yet, no warmth, only something unreadable that made her stomach knot tighter. And when the vows were done and the bells rang and the town applauded, Clara felt as though she had stepped into a story that was not hers, wearing a dress that did not belong to her, carrying a future she did not recognize. And as they left the church and rode together in silence to the house that was now their home, the space between them felt wider than the road itself, filled with words unsaid and questions unanswered. And that night when she sat alone at the edge of the bed staring at her hands while Elias stood near the window gazing out into the dark, she realized how afraid she truly was, not of him exactly, but of what he represented: permanence, commitment, a life shaped by someone else's choices. And though he never raised his voice, never touched her without permission, never spoke harshly, his silence frightened her more than anger ever could, because silence left too much room for imagination, for fear to grow unchecked. And so Clara spent her nights lying, awake listening to his steady breathing beside her, wondering what kind of man he truly was, wondering whether she would ever feel safe, whether she would ever feel seen, whether this marriage would slowly erase who she was or whether she could somehow survive inside it without losing herself. And the town went on with its routines, unaware that behind the polite smiles and well wishes was a young woman struggling to accept a future she had never asked for, married not to a man she loved but to a life she had not chosen. And as days passed, Elias remained reserved and quiet, leaving early, returning late, always respectful but distant. And Clara began to wonder if perhaps he resented the marriage as much as she did, if perhaps they were both trapped inside the same arrangement neither had fully wanted. And though the town assumed stability, wealth, and security were enough to guarantee happiness, Clara learned quickly that safety without love still felt like loneliness, that comfort without understanding still felt cold, and that fear does not always come from cruelty. Sometimes it comes from uncertainty, from silence, from not knowing where you truly stand in someone else's heart. The morning after their first week as husband and wife, Elias surprised Clara by asking her to come with him into town, his voice gentle but firm. And though her heart immediately tightened with worry, she followed him, unsure what awaited her but too tired to resist. And when they arrived in the town square, she was shocked to see a small crowd already gathered, whispering, watching, curious about what Elias was about to do. And before she could ask any questions, he stepped forward and began speaking, his voice steady but carrying something new within it: vulnerability. And he told the town a story no one expected, a story about Clara, about how she had been married too young, about how she had been pressured into a life she did not choose, about how fear had replaced joy on what should have been the happiest day of her life. And the crowd fell silent as he spoke, because no one had ever dared to say these things aloud. No one had ever challenged the polite traditions that hid so much pain beneath them. And then Elias did something that changed everything, and he handed Clara a small wooden box and told her it was her wedding gift. Not from obligation, but from respect. Not from duty, but from care. And when she opened it, her breath caught as she saw inside a stack of official papers, travel documents, letters of recommendation, and a legal statement granting her full financial independence and the freedom to leave the marriage whenever she chose. No questions asked, no consequences attached. And as gasps rippled through the town, Elias looked at her and said quietly, "I did not want a wife who stayed because she had no choice. I wanted a woman who stayed because she wanted to." And Clara felt something inside her break open, not in pain but in relief, in gratitude, in shock so deep it left her trembling, because for the first time since the wedding she felt seen, not as a possession, not as a role, not as an obligation, but as a person, and tears blurred her vision as she realized that the man she had feared was not her enemy but her unexpected ally, someone who understood the unfairness of her situation and refused to be the one who benefited from it. And the town stood frozen, stunned by the quiet power of his gesture, because no one had ever seen a man publicly give a woman the freedom to walk away from him. No one had ever witnessed a wedding gift that was not jewelry or property, but choice itself. And Clara felt the weight on her chest lift for the first time in months as she realized she was no longer trapped, no longer cornered by circumstance, no longer bound by invisible chains disguised as tradition. And in that moment her fear began to dissolve, replaced not instantly by love but by trust. And trust became the bridge that slowly led to understanding, and understanding to affection, and affection to something deeper than either of them had expected. And Clara did not leave that day, not because she had to stay, but because she chose to. And over time the marriage transformed from a prison into a partnership, from a forced beginning into a genuine connection built slowly on honesty, respect, and kindness. And the town never forgot what they witnessed that day, because it challenged everything they thought they knew about power, about marriage, about what it meant to love someone. And Clara never forgot either, because that gift did more than give her freedom. It gave her back herself. And sometimes the greatest love is not in holding someone close, but in giving them the space to decide whether they want to stay.